What's up, Metaverse? My name is Clorama. I'm going to be your host along with my co-hosts, Matt and Erica. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Brief introduction. Matt?
Yeah, hi, my name is Matthew Ho, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Radix Motion. And I love VR, everything immersive. That's where I got my start. Me and Clorama and Erica were all in the OLP cohort early on. And right now, as the Chief Product Officer of Radix Motion, I'm really working with a lot of immersive products, along with various kind of holistic digital care packages for the microdosing for health company.
Oh, that's cool. I'm gonna ask you more about that actually a little bit. Cool. And then Erica, would you like to introduce yourself? I'm gonna turn on my lights.
Sure. I'm Erica Layton. I'm a senior VR interaction prototyper at ProprioVision, which is a mixed reality assisted neurosurgery system. And yeah, my background's actually in fine art. I studied sculpture, and I've been making 3D things since I was a small child. Like, I'm just endlessly fascinated by making things in all different media. And it's been great to be making things in virtual 3D media as well. So it all sort of connects back in that way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wait. So that's cool. I didn't realize you were also doing. I guess is that VR in healthcare neurosurgery training? You said. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and then for me, I like right now I'm a product manager in VR. I help build tools for developers, and I also come from a background of like, well, for me personally, I was like an indie creator, also entrepreneur, and then yeah, so I know Matt and Erica, I've been knowing them for a very long time, actually. They're OGs, pioneers in the space, have been building across a lot of different projects. Specifically, the connection I think we all three of us share is like through Oculus Launchpad, even though we were all different years. So, Erica, I believe you were in 2016, and you were one of the winners in 2016. And then, Matt, you were in the 2018 cohort, was the year after me. But we have all met, ironically, somehow, like I think Matt, we worked together. I met you because you were at the XR studio in Mozilla.
Oh yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah. And then me and Erica were friends online somehow. I think just through the OLP Oculus Launchpad alumni connection. And then I pinged her one day for like interview advice, and then we ended up hanging out. And
I seem to remember finding you on Twitter at some point too. You had like a creative flow, I think, at that point.
Yes, I did. Yes, yeah. Still
I
do.
definitely appreciate Chloe's been definitely a connector in the community. I really appreciate that. I remember when I went to Oculus Launchpad, the convention, and I was freaking out. I didn't know how to get the apartments, how to get everything, because I think at that point, I think 2019, I was officially in OLP, and then 2018, I was part of a team.
Right.
So I wasn't the submission person.
Got it.
And Chloe was so nice, was so generous, and just literally let me use their hotel and introduce me to people. And so, yeah, no, I think you're the one that really helped bring a lot of people together.
I completely forgot. That's right. We did share a hotel.
It was very formative. It was awesome.
Yeah. All people are cool. I feel like the community is family. I feel like you guys are family. Yeah. I feel like it's so funny. It's so easy, like making relationships in this community, and especially with you too. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's something about VR that kind of brings really like-minded people, and I don't know. I just have so much fun in this space. But yeah. I definitely want to, for those who don't know, thank you all for joining us. So this particular talk this actually got inspired by a conversation. So me, Erica, and Matt, we usually meet with a few others of VR creators like once a month. So Matt hosts or organizes a crafternoon once a month, which I think is such a great idea. We've mentioned this in other talks, but for those of you who are looking for inspiration or, find it hard to feel motivated to build something, definitely finding a crew of people to build with. Or even hit us up and we'll send you a link and you can join, and like just like setting up time to co-build with other people who are in your community. I feel like it's just been such a great way for me to like keep my habit or the muscle of building, especially now that I feel like I don't have that much time anymore. And so anyway, so when we do that, like, I feel like we always have these really great conversations around the technology and the space, especially with the news and stuff like that. And these are conversations that I get so stimulated by that often I actually will find myself kind of on search online to look for, but I don't really get these level of perspectives. So I really like, in terms of like what the narrative is around a lot of these new emerging tech topics in the mainstream versus like the people who are making stuff and doing stuff on a daily basis, who are in the trenches building things. And so I feel like I'm so excited to get to have this talk and like just have this discussion or conversation where we all kind of share our ideas and talk about what Metaverse means to us, and what we'd like to see about this, what the practical applications could look like, things that have inspired us about the space, things that maybe worry us about the space, or just things that I feel like should be talked about, or probably not that much. So anyway, so Erica and Matt were like amazing, like they blew my mind a couple weeks ago. So I'm like, let's try to recreate this and yeah, share this with the world. So Metaverse. This is like a very, I feel like this term has been, because it's like now almost a cringy, like now people are kind of a little bit sick of it. There are other emerging terms like Web3 and spatial web and stuff like that coming out. But when you hear the word Metaverse, what do you guys, what do you think, or what does that inspire? Or maybe you've thought about this for a while, and how is it matching up to your expectations of what might be expected? Or yeah, just like, what's your baseline definition of what Metaverse is? Or how?
I think I have kind of a sort of weird idea about it that's maybe a bit different from the kind of the jargony VR version that gets thrown around ever since it came up in very sci-fi. And that's a sort of an in-between space that it's kind of imagined, but I see it not just as, like, say you all go into VR together, like social multiplayer VR or shared VR spaces. I also see it in things like social media, where it's like we're already in this metaverse sort of thing together. Like, even this conversation in a way is like a little figment of the sort of like shared in-between space facilitated by technology. And I also think that it's been there for a while too, in various different forms. And we're just starting to kind of talk about it, think about it more, because consumer VR is now more of a thing. And now it's like, oh, okay, I could be in there and have a body. Whoa, like this is a whole nother level. But I really think that we've been doing the metaverse thing in various forms for a really long time.
That's real. Like it's not metaphysical. Might be not the right word. And energetically, we're kind of already in the like when we're not in physical reality, but we're able to communicate and through forms like this, like technology. Yeah. It's already. Dang, that's real. And then we're just catching up to the idea of like, now we're trying to add a material layer to what already kind of exists in this like shared, thoughts. Noise. Yeah, oh, that's interesting. How do you feel about that, Matt? Or what is your definition? How does it differ?
I think along similar lines, first of all, I really love that point. From what I'm interpreting from what you're saying, it seems to be that we're kind of already creating realities together. Is that kind of what the point that one of the point, like through these digital media, through these conversations? So I think from a baseline, the metaverse being just another layer to that, like you said, but also on one hand, I often say we're always creating virtual realities, right? Like if we create like a group cosplay, if you create a group narrative and you co-create a story, you're kind of creating a VR. That's kind of like has been said. And I think for me, the metaverse would be adding elements on top of that, right? We already have this baseline of communication, language. Language is a technology, at one point we're like, literally, I'm creating a VR by putting things in your head, right? But I do think there is some, on top of that, something to be said to being able to bring play. That I think that's the main thing for me. And I think metaverse could be different for everyone, but emotionally, what really gets me going is like play on top of that, and the options for adding play through environment, space, limitations, toys, So let's say if you're having a conversation with someone, you're creating a universe sort of with them through language, natural language, one-on-one. but even imagine in real life, once you have a sandbox, an RL sandbox, how different when you're a kid, how different the texture of that conversation would go, right? You would create a sandcastle and automatically you're the gods of this universe, right? And draw a map on the sand and you imagine together this whole world. So we already have that in real life. And I feel, for me, what the metaverse that I want is trying to expand and pull out all these various aspects of play and interaction on top of these stories that we already have. So, for instance, I was playing this app called Sculptor VR recently, and I love the multiplayer mode a lot because it reminded me of being in a sandbox. I was usually if I were to meet someone random in person, I would have a conversation with them about the weather or what, and we're kind of like it's rather than like co-creating a story, we're sort of like on a script, right? When we first meet. But with these people, we jumped in, and all of a sudden it was creative. I was able to make a tiny hole and then blow up and become really small, and all of a sudden it's this cave, and this whole story emerged from that, right? So I think there's something to be said about adding these layers of space limitation toys to facilitate this play. I think for me, I don't think that's a broad definition for everyone, because of course there's other aspects of like the utility of it, the internet of everything and like data overlays, right? Is what we think of. But for me, I think that's the basis of what I appreciate and what I want for the metaverse, right?
You had something you want to say, Erica?
Oh yeah, just talking about kids playing the sandbox and going back to language and thinking, okay, I like how you introduced that with, you have this layer of shared language where it's like you're sort of conjuring images in each other's heads, but then you add a physical layer of stuff, like you're in the sandbox and you're like playing with stuff, but then there's this as you say, imaginary element to it where it's like, oh wait, like here, this rock can be a dinosaur, like, we can make mountain ranges and stuff. And then that makes me think about how kids are already making metaverses together. Like they're already creating virtual environments together all the time. So I mean, it's like we're already wired for this stuff. Like it seems like a very natural thing to get together and like create worlds together and then inhabit them in some way. Just like from the time of being
origin. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. That play thing of like when we come into this world, the real world, like as babies, the first thing we do is we play, right? I mean, outside of being nurtured and fed and whatever. Like I feel like play is how we orient ourselves into this world, and that's kind of like where we learn and we grow and blah 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 and start to form our personalities. So I love that you're thinking about it too, Matt, from like that introductory, like that's something that I mean, you've always operated in that space of play. I feel like your foray into your foray into VR, I've always known you like doing the embodied reality and doing like kind of researching or experimenting with different ways that motion is captured or displayed visually in the spatial ecosystem, whatever, VR particularly. So I think that's interesting. Like it makes sense. Like that's how you would now then approach like how does metaverse make that or add to that or whatever. And yeah. So I get what you're saying. Like it is a interesting way to think of how that can start to formulate how we think and whatever. It is a fundamental human trait, but yes, of course there's all these other use cases that could also apply to, but that's a really cool way that you're coming at this as well.
Yeah, definitely starting from where like our basic needs, right, plays. So or these basic needs are like kind of put aside as like, oh, childish, right? But it's like literally the probably a very big part of our cognitive process of how we learn, and maybe even like how we became successful as a species. We were able to create VRs together, like we are VR machines, and so we're able to like be very successful in that. But anyway, I totally agree with that. And as you were talking to in work that I've done before, and to the point that play and exploration and these various ways of approaching developments, I think is important, I think, especially within the climate, or rather than climate, maybe the ways in which software and computers are developed today, which I think is a little bit divorced from, you know, how I said play is literally how we learn, how we grow, how we create realities together. It's like spreadsheets, and like it's for capitalism, and you know, it makes sense. It's very useful, and it's great. But oftentimes I feel like it's a little bit divorced from these early senses of how we actually made sense of the world. It wasn't through like, oh, these numbers, these spreadsheets, like those are very useful tools, but it's a legit language that we force the brains to like learn, right?
Yeah, the lens of capitalism, or like that.
So
kind
how
of
do
stuff.
we move towards like play and like even maybe not like woo, but like I feel like saying like, but almost mysticism, you know, almost like oh, like there's something out there, like this. And doing that together, definitely, I think it's so important for computers to reflect that, because like how can we be divorced from these needs? You know, we can't move forward. Like we literally became successful because we leverage these things. So how do we build the computers in this new paradigm to reflect that, so maybe we can move forward? And I don't know, 100,000 years ago, someone was like, let's create a story in this new way, and they built into something new. And maybe we're in a similar area now. Who knows?
And Erica, you also did a lot of play things. I think I remember I met you when you were a prototyper working on half and half. So I feel like a lot of the prototyping, you're experimenting with like how to. I from what I remember, some of the stuff that you let me play test, you were like kind of. Also interested in the dynamic of the interactions between people in these spaces. Like I know that you wanted to say something. What was that? Were you going to lend your insight somewhere around there, or did I take you off course?
I was actually going to mention how Sculpture VR. Sculpture VR is a good example of, as you say, like a sandbox environment where you're no longer on rails in the same way that you are in a lot of kind of computing environments. You're not being asked to do things that are optimized for computers. You have the freedom to, to play, to create your own stuff in a very human way. When I was prototyping stuff for Normal, there was a ton of kind of R&D work that was also very much like play, and I feel it was a really valuable experience with really amazing people. But it's also definitely like a get in and try it and explore things in a way that would have taken your imagination as a kid. But like let's say, for example, in VR, you could make yourself tiny or huge. And something I've learned from VR that I don't think I could have gotten elsewhere is if there's an interaction and one party is really huge and another is really tiny, you got to be really careful if you're the huge party, because you look like just a building, a whole side of a building moving from the tiny point of view. Every time I catch a small creature now, I'm like, oh, okay, I think I know how you feel. I'll be really careful.
They're vulnerable. It invokes those vulnerabilities.
Stuff like that, where you could imagine it as a kid, like, oh, okay, I caught the frog, I need to be careful not to squash it. But to be able to like actually change yourself as well, like change the way you're embodied as well, is new. It's like one of the new parts in all this.
So for okay, so I heard two things right in terms of your guys' like definition. Erica, I hear like this already exists. We're doing right now, we're kind of just layering, or we're making it physical, and so and then I hear for you, Matt, like, it's the possibilities around play and how we start to learn more about ourselves or expand or experiment in ways that we haven't, that can, I think, inspire imagination beyond what we could have done based on physical real world limitations and even social online limitations. So this is interesting. It's still very open. Why people who are new to this space, who are coming to this topic, like why should they care ultimately? Like, is this a big deal? Do you think this is something that's going to change the way we live? Or do you feel like we're just naturally going to evolve into it, but we'll have more superhero like powers in these different directions? Like, what is someone coming into this space? What is something that you think that would it compel them to should they care about it or not? Like, can they just live their life and it's okay? They don't need to study it or research it. Or what makes you interested in this, if that's another way to answer that question.
there's something that I see happen when people first get into a virtual experience, and I see it over and over again in all different contexts, and it's this sort of, at first it's like you're going back to being 5 years old, and or maybe even younger, and you're kind of learning how to use your body in space, and there's lots of like sort of throwing things around or just poking the environment and stuff. But there's also sort of a little bit of a social vacuum as well. A lot of people get into social VR for the first time. What do I do? Unless there's like an obvious activity, there's just some props or something. What do I do? How do I interact with people in this new body? And I think there's an opportunity there to, obviously we all like bring whatever baggage in with us that we've lived already, but to start kind of building new cultures in a way, like start kind of, I don't know, like getting to be children together in a context where we're kind of creating our own new baggage that hopefully can be a little more thoughtful.
Yeah, sounds like basically just life, like when you like finding your identity, finding a place or an environment where you feel comfortable and are happy and or you can contribute to. And then Matt too, you were like hinting a little bit about like, systems being placed like with currency and all this stuff. So like it sounds like as we're simultaneously like, how do we build our place in this like new whatever this is, and figuring that out and having those like, how we shape those cultures, how we add to it, how do we decide what we want, like I that's just definitely kind of what makes it interesting from that perspective. But also too, there are people now already adding these systems, right? The cryptocurrency is already considered a way that or at least that's what it seems like, the NFT talk, like how currency will be exchanged in this new medium, how regulation should work. There's a lot of these conversations, what policies exist, like what like these are already kind of starting to form the building blocks, blockchain and all of that for the metaverse. Do you see is that something like we should count on as being staples? Do you guys agree with those systems, or like how do you feel the clash of the two, like
of between blockchain and
just even all these new systems that are starting to be physicalized in this metaverse space, at the same time as people going into it and trying to understand it and trying to figure out, how we interact or participate. What's that juxtaposition look like? It seems like they're forming at the same time. Whereas like obviously on Earth, all this stuff was kind of set on stone, right? We came into this world, if you believe in past lives, probably with our past baggage. And, we have to make our way, in this new world, but the money system's already kind of placed. Whatever country you're in, that culture is pretty much set. These are all imparted on you, like from the get-go, unless you decide, you're going to switch countries. And then there's like rules there that kind of already exist and systems in place. Whereas this metaverse, it sounds like you guys are both saying like, that isn't necessarily defined yet, at least not from your perspective. And so what does that mean? What does that,
Well, once you start defining parts of that, though, whoever gets to define that is bringing their own biases in and bringing their own cultural familiarity in, and then that sets it up to be more or less familiar to whoever encounters it. So I mean, like let's say I go into a metaverse where somebody's designed a lot of culture into it, like system of currency and exchange, I don't know, maybe some sort of like garb that's recognizable, even the shape of the environment and what that invites you to do. Are there things to like sit on or teleport onto? How does that invite you to interact with other people? That'll feel very familiar to the people who design it, but I don't know, like if they're very different from me in the real world, does that mean that the stuff they design is going to be like kind of alien to me at first? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it just a different thing? But I don't know. I think there's a lot to be considered there. Also about whether you feel welcome in a particular space too. We rant about the cultural biases and familiarity of the designers of various metaverse spaces, and how that can feel more or less familiar to people encountering those spaces.
Definitely.
As users as well.
I think it's definitely, I empathize or sympathize, both. I empathize and sympathize with people that make avatars. I also feel, or just building the culture, right? It makes me think about like, even if you do have a diverse, or I suppose we're experimenting with this, like the mainstream population has been experimenting with new bodies in VR, and it's this very novel concept, right? And it's hard, right? Even if you create an experience that has many settings, it's still settings, and it's settings changing aspects of the character, and so like what are the settings? It's always within a context, right? I think building off of what you said, on a technical side, building frameworks for creating avatars, creating spaces, creating customizable experiences for expressions, that getting higher levels. So I think we can make more interesting mistakes with our building, because I think it's still very much, you start from scratch and you make this silo and this system of like my system of like my shirt system, my hair system, and it can be blue, green colors, right? So I think on a technical side, that can definitely be awesome. But also on a cultural side, I think recognizing that we've been stuck in, especially within mainstream culture of like, we have, humans are so incredibly related. Our human species went through like a really big bottleneck at one point, and like we're just very, very close to each other, even if we think we're not. We're of the same settings, and like within the same, like, like one person's 5%, one person's like 5.5% on the scale, And so I also think that we can look at communities that don't necessarily felt like they fit into what we consider like mainstream. For instance, I've been saying for a while, drag queens, drag performers, drag kings are really, they've been doing this. Like it's been interesting when I talk to people within that community, when I describe this, they get it a lot quicker. They're like, what? When I say it to someone like, oh yeah, I made this avatar with this like tentacle creature and it's just like blah, blah, blah. And they're like, why do you want that? And I talk to someone else that's like, they're like, yeah, this work. Like what? Like, of course.
Yes.
Like, I love that. So I definitely think a part of it is, aside from like, it is a hard technical problem to make a very customizable system.
Right.
But like culturally, I think like these interplays will help feed off of each other a lot.
So, about that. So, okay. So this is amazing, right? I love that idea of like, in the real world, there's a set standard for how to define yourself or how to express yourself. Whereas it sounds like you're saying implicitly that like this potential metaverse has the opportunity where people can redefine that or, change those limitations or parameters and play with it.
For entry. I see it even with Snapchat filters, for instance. I saw, it's a mixed feeling. Like, for instance, I saw there was a trend a while ago when the face AI to change you to be more stereotypically masculine or stereotypically feminine, whatever the neurons in that AI decided that was. I found that some people used it as like making fun of being a woman, which wasn't good. I saw of just be like, oh, haha, what if, haha, and I'm like, honey, it's okay, like that's great. Like they seem legitimate joy from it, and even if they weren't like, oh, I'm trans now, it's like, wow, this filter really, like it let them play with it in this really low barrier to entry. Perhaps it's not perfect because there's biases in these algorithms, so it's not, those are by no means a perfect example. But what I'm talking about here is like people in like the queer, trans, and many other communities that are more marginalized, I would say, have known this very well. That's why I say like queer and trans people are like transhumanists, they're the first they understand, the body is outside of this gender binary, outside of so many of these things. And so when I see avatars reflect these boxes, I understand why it's done, I get it. And I've also, as someone that like has built avatars, and even when I make my avatars alien, it's like, okay, now you're like a blue alien, or you're a blue alien with this, it's really hard to get it to be a remixable, truly remixable and like modular kind of thing. It's possible, but it takes time.
And by remixable and modular, you mean
I'm
like
talking a lot now, but
my
main point is that if we can include and maybe not only learn from, but really include these voices center and forefront. They've been doing this work for decades, like for probably as long as humans existed, I would say, and also these like systems of, you know, expression have been like kind of baked into society. There's always been. So I would say that that's a big inspiration for me. Even when I did early on, me and my friend Yilid, we did this VR drag performance, and that was the first time I had ever done drag, and it was so interesting seeing people's reactions to that. Like it was almost as if, because it was in a different space, I feel it like the expectations were reset, so it got even more weird. I don't know how to describe it.
Yes, you were in an environment where it was like the rules were that rules promoted this level of, you know,
and I feel that very strongly within the spaces where they do these, you know, these performances where you're changing your body, you're changing, you know, these things, like, you know, queer drag spaces. And I also feel it if I'm in, I potentially within a space, you know, where if it was also immersive. So,
So this is where we get into now like avatars and identity and what we look like in this metaverse. And it sounds like there's an opportunity. I mean, for me, I would imagine like, because there is no, I don't know how to say, like the ability to be able to create your own avatars. I know in some of these experiences, that's the case. And in the real world, this was something that was chosen, and you know, because it's kind of like a trait that kind of gets ostracized in society, like the only way you can actually you'd have to have already a very strong drive and passion to push these boundaries of expression, find a community who shared that value, where then you can safely explore that. And usually these communities, if you've seen, like watching Pose on Netflix was like my like introduction to like this world where like this underground world that they created a safe space for people to really just push those boundaries and play with expression and play with identity in the same way that you'll see like in VR chat, people are doing that. And now this is being kind of extended. This ability to do that is now being, how do you say, not universalized, but being offered in terms of ease of access, like you were saying. And people are now starting to explore those and ask these questions. And we're also seeing, you know, introductions of avatars and different ways that they're being, the rules that are being held in terms of what we're being offered. But perhaps like there is opportunity for us to create our own. And what does that mean? And so, oh my gosh, sorry, Erica, you were about to say something. Were you about to say something along those lines? Or otherwise, I would love to ask you, like, what are your thoughts on, you know, avatar and identity, or identity in the metaverse in general, especially in relation to, you know, if we're already here, what does that look like? And what are you hoping to contribute in this space, or what is something that you're excited to contribute to the metaverse?
Well, I've definitely had some thoughts on avatars and identity. I was thinking a little earlier, so I've only done drag in real life. I've never done drag in VR. I'd be very curious to see what was similar and what was different. And you know, there've also been times in my life where I wouldn't say I'd quite passed as a gender different than I was assigned at birth, but I was definitely a little different. And the ways in which, I guess that relates to performative gender, the ways in which people treat you differently if your performative gender is a little different. It might be appearance, it might also be behavior as well. And I relate this back to avatars in a sense of wondering, like, okay, so you can put on different identities, you can kind of put on different bodies. And in some ways I see that as being, you know, great, wonderful, like maybe explore a part of yourself that's really a part of yourself that you haven't been able to explore before. But I also wonder about, like, it seems very okay to do that if it's like really a part of yourself in some way, but does it get sort of messy or problematic if it's more kind of like body tourism? Like let's say that, and I think it gets messier with race, and I hate to bring her up, but I think of Rachel, was it Rachel Dolezal?
Yeah, Rachel Dolezal. Yeah, I think that's her name.
It's like, you know, it's like gender is one thing, but it's as soon as you've got the ability to make yourself look like a different race than you started as, I don't know, I see that it's being incredibly messy because you're, I guess it could be a learning experience in that, like, let's say, I don't know, like, let's say I made myself look black in VR. People would then probably treat me as if I was black until I opened my mouth and I sound, you know, very, very probably East Coast waspy, very white. So it could be a learning experience in how people would kind of treat you, but it's also very messy in that I wouldn't be giving people back what's expected.
I mean, and that's and what is expected, right? And so there's a lot there in that too. So I definitely have heard like of men who've, you know, who've I put on a woman's body avatar, and all of a sudden was exposed to a range of, you know, treatment or communication styles that they had not experienced, you know, showing up as a male avatar, and how that like lent itself to empathy or the other direction. And I think like all these things are right. They're all question marks. They all have different, they're very complicated, especially when you get into the racial stuff. There's definitely a lot there historically. Western society, I think, has made it really difficult for us to really all explore with true respect and understanding versus like, you know, I think whatever expectation, like for me, ideally, an ideal world is that there wouldn't be any expectations that you would have of someone who's black or white or woman or female differently, outside of, you know, maybe like something very basic, I don't know, maybe, but I would like to think like the ideal world where, you know, everything is equal and there are no gender norms or race norms or whatever. You know, we wouldn't come in with those preconceived notions, but I mean that's not how human minds work. But in VR, I almost wonder, because anybody could be behind an avatar, and I think Ready Player One kind of highlighted this with I forget what the name of that. It was a black woman that portrayed herself as a male and had the voice changer, who really used this as a way to live successfully or with less inconveniences, even in a virtual reality. So like, and it was a way to explore that. Yeah, like that's for me, like, you know, I would think like, oh, it would be really cool to be like a male avatar and see like, and like to be able to play a game in peace. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so it's the reverse.
Problem.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what I'm saying?
To be oneself in peace would be nice.
Yes. Yeah. But like I think also like you hinted, we bring our biases into this space in the same way that we do in the real world. So not necessarily like, even though people are showing up as avatars, if you do show up as a certain type of avatar, a female avatar, for example, you are still going to be experiencing things that are likely to have experienced if you were. The only difference is now you can take it off the headset or whatever medium you're using to channel that space. So, or you can just switch it with a touch of a button. You switch your identity, which is all that is really, really like really interesting stuff. So this is great. So like in terms of being able to create, like how important do you think it is for people who are entering this space to come in as creators, versus people who are coming in and just like, you know, accepting things as they are, or just kind of, you know, observing it and is participating pretty neutrally?
I think it's very important to come with a creative lens, even if you're just consuming these experiences.
Yeah,
it's just as important to be watching films and TV and commercials through film study lens or through some critical lens, right? Because everything has a story, everything has a motive. So yeah, even if you're not coming in as a creator, I would encourage people to, you know, think like, how would I make this? How does this make me feel? Well, how does my body feel in this environment? When I see this avatar and this person, like, what does that mean outside of VR? I think that is very important, especially because it's like very burgeoning now. So in the early stages, we're figuring out what is correct and what is good, right? And even as a consumer, we have hands in that. I mean, certainly developers have the most, but I think it's important to come. Or if you so choose, I think it can be very useful and enlightening to do so.
Yeah. What about you, Erica?
I hope there are design choices that can encourage play and curiosity about each other. Because I don't know. I think that a lot of the differences and sort of the baggage we come in is pretty important to who we are. But it would just, I don't know, be nice if there were a kinder way to learn about each other. You know, it's like in digital contexts, it often comes out in such painful, exhausting ways. Like I just wonder if something about metaverse design could be like a little more gentle and a little more inquisitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've
building constraints that are I suppose, like in designing to encourage for pro-social behavior. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like making the design to be more than pro-social, but just like putting designs that encourage like that
participation or contributing to the change you want to see. I feel like this is like so deep because I like, this is like, again, I have a political science background. I worked in community organizing a lot. And so there's a lot, and as someone who's like a citizen, I know, especially in America, where right now politics is like a hot topic all the time. I feel like it begs the question, like, how did we design that in real life? What was the success example here, if there is? How are we failing to help people feel they have control over their environments? You have the control over the quality of your neighborhoods. You have the control of your to participate in the shaping of your culture. And how do we not transfer those mistakes for people who feel complacent or feel like they can't, powerless to do so in the real world? How does that transfer or translate into this metaverse world?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's
And I like that, the idea of like, how can we design onboarding experience? I almost feel like this can mirror a solution to the real world. Like if we can design an onboarding experience there that really gives people the sense of control of their environment, and they get really excited to be able to create an environment that feels healthy or safe or, you know, positive or whatever is in their image, and they find their people who are in agreement with it. How do they bring that back to the real world to feel more powerful to take action because they've gotten that sense of gratification? There's research that shows, like, you know, if you exhibit traits of a superhero in a virtual world, you translate that ends up being a pro-social behavior driver in the real world. So I'm almost like,
that reminds me of what when we were chatting earlier, when you mentioned about getting to drive the giant truck, and just like, heck yes, just feels awesome.
Yes, that's right. Yes. But that's interesting. So for those who didn't know, right before we went on live or recording, we're talking about how different cars, I think Matt was bringing up that there was research that shows like when you're inhabiting like a car, it becomes part of an extension of your identity. And so whatever that car looks and feels like, you'll take on those traits, or that whatever we've imposed or interpret meaning of that. And I provided evidence for that example because I had one time I rented a huge SUV truck. No, a huge truck. I forgot what the brand is called, GMC truck. And it was gigantic, and it was very masculine. I felt masculine. I felt a little bit more aggressive. I felt a little bit more powerful, very powerful, and I felt invincible a bit, like, because I knew I was in this car. I was like, if worst comes to worst, an accident happened, like, I knew I'm more likely to be okay. And so therefore I was taking a little bit more risk and, you know, all of that. But now I'm driving, I have another rental car. Don't ask my car situation. And it's like a really small, like coupe kind of, it's not a coupe, but it's like a Kia or some kind of like hatchback. And it's much more agile, very petite. And I feel a lot more feminine in it, which is ironic. But this is obviously the feelings that it's evoking in me is what I interpret, what associations I have with a smaller, more compact car, where I feel I have a lot more control, more agility in, to maneuver around things that might be inconvenient. Like I can make U-turns like in places where like a truck, I'd have to just go around the whole block because it's not going to happen. And so I was just explaining like how that it changed my feelings. And so I think what you're trying to lend that to, Erica, is like, how do we design experiences like that in this metaverse that can shape or encourage feelings where people feel more actioned or activated to take positive action. And obviously that's going to change with different cultures, right? So like, it's only because I'm in America and I see millions of truck commercials during the Super Bowl that have heavy metal music and like heavy male masculine voice, and that associated with the truck driving and the like whatever.
Power and height aside, it's been thoroughly branded in there as well.
Yes, and so that's the association that I've kind of put on implicitly to be defined as this card that I'm now internalizing. But maybe in a different country, those kind of cards are associated with weakness or associated with too much or whatever, and so maybe someone from a different country coming to this space, that design actually wouldn't work for them to feel activated. So I feel like it begs a lot of these. I know, I just feel like that's so legit.
Here's a question, or a thought and then a question. So I think of situations where I encounter someone who's we're really culturally different from each other, and maybe we bump up against each other for reasons we don't realize. Like, as you say, we just interpret the same thing differently or have different associations with it. And it comes out in sort of maybe an awkward conversation, or maybe we kind of knock heads a little and then are like, oh, wait, this is why. I wonder if there's some way to design some kind of virtual stuff so it sort of encourages you to have the conversation. It's like, okay, I, the designer, have no idea what this conversation will be, because people are, incredibly unique in and of themselves too. But, how can we give a little nudge? Like, hey, folks, put on this hat. It's going to mean something different for you and for this other person. But then, communicate.
Yes, and that's
something interesting about it.
And that's why I loved VR. I love that exactly for that. That was literally my introduction to VR, was how do I make unconscious behaviors visible? How do we, what's the data feedback? And I do think the virtual world specifically has this unique value where we could deliver that. Like you see with the IAT test, the implicit association test that you can take that measures your unconscious reactions or associations with negative words and identity traits. What it's doing, it's being able to, in this behavior that you're exhibiting in VR, you can translate the millisecond to the thousandth milliseconds, if not even more, your reaction time to associating certain types of things with certain types of people, and being able to create an average and understand the discrepancy between you were slower to react to this millisecond, which is something we wouldn't have been able to do or replicate in real world, to understand unconscious behaviors, what those symptoms look like, and then how do we measure it, and how do we give that feedback in real time.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. Who do you think the metaverse will benefit the most, and why? And who do you think should be that you're not seeing in the mainstream? We could say will, but if you think it's too early, which would you? Should? Who do you think should? I think that's a more interesting, inspiring question.
Think about that for a minute.
Okay.
This is complicated. It's I could think of a few different levels on which.
I'd love to hear all the levels for it. Yeah, we have we have 15 more minutes, but 5 more minutes if you want to if we're gonna close this out.
This is where the capitalist part of my brain says, well, good business is really where everybody, or the maximum number of people win. So I think the ideal reality would look something like all parties are getting something out of it that's constructive and, helping the whole thing proceed constructively. But I'm sure it'll be a lot messier than that.
Yeah. So, aspirationally, what would you like to see? If you could design this metaverse your way or whatever, if you could have it, you're what do you feel like, which group would you like to see benefit from the most of it, and why? Or people.
I actually kind of think of Gen Z. I mean, I'm a millennial, but I go on TikTok and I'm like, wow, the kids are all right, and they're growing up in a really, really kind of technologically complicated world that they're very adapted to. So I hope that Gen Z and kids who come after them can, I guess, just take this and run with it and continue to blossom and continue being awesome in various ways.
I love that.
I'm very hopeful for that.
Yeah. And I feel like Gen Z being if I hear about Gen Z, the words that I feel like typically describe them as authenticity. And I think it's empathy, or just in general seems to be a very humanitarian like group, but authenticity being key, especially when we talk about metaverse and identity. Like, what does that look like if, you know, when Gen Z is helping to contribute on that? Sorry, go. And then what do you think? Who do you think who would you like to see benefited most by this? Who do you imagine would be benefited?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would like if the creative tools of VR or whatever immersive medium, it could be whatever, you know, it's this cloud of immersive things, AR, you know, tracking, CV stuff. I just hope that they will become accessible Lego blocks that can be, you know, played with by just, I think mirroring what Eric was saying, really, it's just like be able to be democratized as most possible, you know, have that just like even people that don't like have money, you know, necessarily. I mean, of course, like VR is not the, like, you know, you need your other material needs met. So I'm not saying like, oh, give them VR and like, that's great. But I hope for the sake of the culture, for the sake of the creativity, I really hope that people from all economic classes can use it. On a personal level, I think growing up queer on the internet was cool, but also like complex. I don't know. There were aspects of it that I really loved and felt were formative and like I really needed. And there were other aspects of it that were more, I don't know, I guess like, yeah, just harder. Well, yeah, I guess on the internet as it was back then. And I hope just the quote unquote weirdos of society, you know, the kids that don't feel necessarily like they have their niche, can have a space to explore and play. And I really hope these systems don't nudge them into, you know, more kind of feedback loops that are unhealthy, like, you know, body image stuff. I really hope this variety of things can help them be like, yes, try on these new things. I think especially mirroring what Eric was saying for Gen Z, it's like it's so hard to find these identities in this new age, especially with COVID, right? So for instance, there's this whole like underground crew that people like put on full body tracking and like dance, like break dance in VR chat, right? There's this niche.
That's awesome. Of people. I did not realize that, but I'll have to check that out.
Okay, let's hang out. Okay, let's have that.
I'm gonna do it too.
I really bought all the equipment for this because like I just bought my Vive and my trackers. So I really like they have.
Oh, you're going on a field trip sometime?
Yeah, it's this kind of stuff where it's like finding your niche, and then it being democratized in small enough Lego pieces where. Because I just don't want it to, you know, it's easy for the world to become very baked in, and that. So on a technical level, I would also want it to be, you know, not one universe for one, like it's just not one expansive experience that runs on the same, like game loop. You know, I would want it to be like standards, like interoperable standards that can make it so like there's something that you can connect them somewhat to, you know, and you can exist in these niches and spaces. So there is some cohesion or some ability to cross-pollinate, you know, not to optimize within your silo because, you know, if you make up your experience, it will optimize towards a very specific niche. So enough cross-pollination, but also like interoperable, you know, so it could be something like maybe right now it's on, there's a small experience on the web stack, right? And that's interoperable with something else. And there's this like queer space over here that has like privacy settings and rules that are very centered towards like not radicalizing people towards bad spaces if they're young people, and also protecting young people from, you know, that might be vulnerable from other populations. But yeah, like kind of just an ecosystem that, and then it's accessible to everyone. And this is very optimistic, idealistic, right?
Yes,
and I think I just
it's good. I love it. We need that nowadays.
Street smarts.
Yeah.
Like you have to imagine it.
Manifest it. Speak it out.
Exactly. Something that allows us to imagine a better future, you know? Like
right.
A tool to imagine something better. Like that is the main thing, I think, if it summed it up.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. Oh my gosh. This is such a great chat. I feel like I could still go another hour, but we don't, Zoom is going to cut out on us in 3 minutes. But thank you so much for your chat and for conversating, and I'm excited. Hopefully we could do this more often. But yeah, for everyone watching, I hope you learned a lot from that chat and got inspired in terms of thinking about this. I think for me the biggest points of this is, you know, the opportunity to come in as creators and to really create more things that you'd like to see and be able to contribute into that larger space. I love that this is basically Metaverse is nothing different. We've been operating in this kind of world already, and so now it's just more new opportunities to build things and shape it in a way that you'd like to see it form into. And I feel like exactly what you said, now is the best time. I also loved, thank you, Matt, for the perspective of identity and the drag community and how they really can offer a lot of amazing insights, particularly when it comes to avatars and expression, and even how that's now becoming accessible in a very watered down way, not in the right, not obviously drag is like a sacred act, but like, you know, like how there's an opportunity here where the whole world can start to participate in switching identities and maybe normalizing it, you know, so that way these communities are no longer hidden. Yeah, so, oh my gosh, so much really good stuff. Thank you again for your guys' time. And with that, we'll sign off.
Yeah,
see you guys later. Until next time.